Good day everyone, I'm Rojan Gali S. Villanueva, the next reporter for today's video. So I'm going to share to you the song works of famous haiku writers from Japan and their story or background. Historically, there are only few poets in Japan who over the countries have become respected for their haiku poetry. Among these are Basho, Buson, Isa, and Shiki. There are four master haiku poets from Japan known as the Great Four. Their work is still model for traditional haiku writing today. Of these four, the most famous is Basho. He is credited with making haiku a revered form of poetry. Before Basho refined the haiku poem, its form of 17 syllables has been used, but not with the simplicity and depth of meaning that Basho brought to the form. Basho was born in 1644 in the city of Ueno. His father was a samurai of lower rank in the service of the Todo family. When Basho was 9 years old, he became a study companion of the Todo family heir, Yoshitida. These two became a great friends and studied the art of linked verse under a famous writer of that time, Teitoku. Yoshida died at the age of 25 and leaving Basho crushed with grief. Basho asked to be released from the service to the Todo family, but his request was denied, so he ran away to the Kyoto. It is believed that he spent several years there to the temple studying the Chinese and Japanese classics. In 1671, Basho returned to his home in Ueno and presented to the shrine there an anthology of works of many authors, including himself, which he edited and critiqued. The anthology was well received and Basho gained respect for the work. Soon, therefore, he left for Odo, now what we call the Tokyo, the capital city of the Japan, which was the center of the Tokugawa government. There, he worked at various jobs as he made a name for himself in the circle of poets. He was invited to study with the Soen, a famous contemporary poet. It was Soen's influence that brought Basho the value of the humble and unpretentious use of images from everyday life that would become the hallmark of his poetry. So in 1976, Basho began to compose the poetry for publication. The poems were wrote appeared in many anthologies over the next 4 years, and he found himself with disciples whose poems were also being published. However, he was not satisfied with this type of writing and eventually moved to a small house by a river. Living by himself, he began to withdraw from the world around him. Sign of his spiritual suffering can be seen in the poems from his period. In 1682, Basho's home was destroyed by fire. His writing of the following 2 years revealed his resulting distress as he struggled to find his own style of expression. In the summer of 1684, Basho started on the first of his 5 famous travels around Japan. It was a precocious time to travel, and most of the people would not simply take to the open road. His records of his travel have become classical literature. They are written in the combination of prose and poetry called haibun. His writing took a mature, knowing style, representing the spiritual distance he had traveled. Anthologies of his work were published during this period, including Spring Days, a collection of his own and his pupil poems containing Basho's most precious haiku. Here are 3 examples of haiku poems from Matsuo Basho that consider the greatest haiku poet. poem is representative of Basha's mature style. On the surface, it is a description of an action of a frog. However, considered more deeply, it is also a mirror that reflects the author. Basho writes, "Your poetry issues of its own accord when you and the object have become one. When you have plunged deep enough to the object to see something like a hidden glimmering there. However, well praised your poetry may be, if your feeling is not natural, if the object and yourself are separate, then your poetry is not true poetry, but merely your subjective counterfeit." Basho continued to travel and write, but in 1962, he settled into a house where he spent the next 2.5 years in isolation. The poems of these years again reflect his detachment from life. In 1994, he left on the last of his major travels. The poems from this trip, Last Journey, suggest a foreboding. Basho's health was poor, and he began to compose his deathbed poems. Basho died on October 12, 1694. His works have remained timeless and are today revered as those of a master poet. Little drop of the essence of poetry. The Samson. The next writer that we're going to tackle is Yosa Buson. Buson, also called Yosa Buson, original surname is Taniguchi, which is born in 1716 in Kenma, Setsu province in Japan, and he died in January 17, 1784 in Kyoto. Japanese painter of distinction, but even more renowned as one of the great haiku poets. Buson came of a wealthy family but chose to leave it behind to pursue a career in the arts. He traveled extensively in northern Japan and studied haiku under several masters, among them Hayano Hajin, Fumiyulo Guys in Hojoku Rosen, Wotonamu in 1745, homage to Hojoku Rosen. In 1751, he settled in Kyoto as professional painter, remaining there for most of his life. He did, however, spend 3 years from 1754 to 57 in Yosat, Tango Province, a region noted for its scenic beauty. There he worked extensively to improve his technique in both poetry and painting. During this period, he changed his surname from Taniguchi to Yosa. Buson's fame as a poet rose particularly after 1772, a revival of the tradition of his great predecessor, Matsuo Basho, but never reached the level of humanistic understanding attained by Basho. Buson's poetry, perhaps reflecting in interest in painting, is ornate and sensuous, rich in visual detail. Use the colloquial language to transcend colloquialism, he urged. And he declared that in haiku, one must talk poetry. To Buson, this required not only an accurate ear and experienced eye, but also intimacy with the Chinese and Japanese classics. Buson's interest in Chinese poetry is especially evident in 3 long poems that are irregular in form. His experimental poems has been called Chinese poems in Japanese, and 2 of them contain passage in Chinese. Here are the 3 examples of haiku poems from Yosa Buson. In the Moonlight by Yosa Buson is beautiful and simple poem but an experience in natural world. The first line introduced the reader to a scene marked by a pale moonlight. This is expanded on when they add the important detail and the scent of wisteria. This is the most important element of a poem, and it is enhanced by the fact that it's drifting in from far away. This adds a wistful and nostalgic quality to the poem, suggesting that the speaker is imagining different place and time. The next haiku writer that we're going to tackle is Kobayashi Isa, or also known as Kobayashi Ryataro and Kobayashi Nobuyuki. He was born in Kashiwabara, Shinano province. He eventually took the pen name Isa, which means cup of tea, or according to the poet Robert Hass, a single bubble in a stepping tea. Isa's father was a farmer. His mother died when he was young, and he was raised by his grandmother. His father remarried, and Isa did not get along with his stepmother or stepbrother, eventually becoming involved in disputes over his father's property. When Isa was 14, he left home to study haiku in Edo, or now what we call Tokyo. He spent years traveling and working until returning to the Kashiwabara in early 1810s. In Kashiwabara, his life was marked by sorrow. The death of his first wife and 3 children, an unsuccessful second marriage, the burning down of his house, and the third marriage. Isa's haiku are attentive to the small creature of the world, mosquitoes, bats, and cats, as they are tingled with sorrow and an awareness of the nuisance of human behavior. In addition to haiku, Isa wrote pieces that intertwined prose and poetry, including Journal of My Father's Last Days and The Year of My Life. Here are some examples of haiku from Kobayashi Isa, a renowned haiku poet. So this is the end of my report. Again, I'm Rajan Gali S. Villanueva, and thank you for listening. Thank you.